It's from the overturning of Roe v. Wade to the blockbusting testimony from a 25-year-old former aide to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. No doubt the news cycles have been fast and furious. But during this whirlwind period, a major piece of bipartisan gun safety legislation was passed by the House and Senate and signed into law by Joe Biden. And this happened just 4 days ago. This is the first federal law regarding gun safety signed into law by a U.S. president in 30 years. But why hasn't this major piece of legislation gotten more attention? And are gun safety advocates cheering or lamenting the new law? And finally, will this new gun bill have any impact on the November midterm elections? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
From Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Something really big happened last week. It was the Senate unveiling of potentially the most significant new federal gun safety measure in decades. The new law includes money for school safety, mental health, state crisis intervention programs, and incentives for states to include juvenile records in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which would provide a more comprehensive background check for those between the ages of 18 and 21 who want to buy guns. The bill also expands an existing law that prevents people convicted of domestic violence from owning a gun to include dating partners rather than just spouses and former spouses, closing the so-called boyfriend loophole. The law also includes incentives for states to pass so-called red flag laws that allow groups to petition courts to remove weapons from people deemed a threat to themselves or others. The signing comes just over a month after the mass shooting at a Texas elementary school, which killed 19 students and 2 teachers. Also, it comes after a couple of weeks, or more than a couple of weeks and a month after the racist attack in Buffalo, New York, that left 10 Black African Americans dead. Now, not surprisingly, the National Rifle Association opposes the new gun safety bill. And it's interesting to note that the law was passed and signed by Joe Biden just days after the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision saying that there is a constitutional right to carry a handgun in public for self-defense purposes in the state of New York. Now, while some activists are applauding this new gun safety law, many experts say it doesn't go far enough. Big question we're also asking today is, will Democrats be rewarded in the November primaries for getting something done on gun safety, something that has eluded other presidents, including President Donald Trump? Here from my leadoff panel are Nick Wilson. He's the Senior Director of Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress, and Dr. Alexandra Philandra. She is a professor of political science at the University of Illinois, where she studies the public opinion, public policy, and gun politics in the U.S. She has a new book coming out next year called Race, Rights, and Rifles. Good morning and welcome, Nick, and welcome, Dr. Philandra.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just want to put this conversation in perspective when we talk about gun safety legislation and why this bipartisan bill in some ways is significant, but yet it's gotten not a whole lot of attention. But when you think about the fact that there have been 281 mass shootings in the U.S. in this year alone, and as of June 8th, there were 27 mass shootings at schools. When you look at those numbers, I'll start with you, Nick. Why do you think this bipartisan bill hasn't gotten a lot more attention?
That's a great question, and I really appreciated your great summary of the legislation earlier. I think definitely there was a lot of attention between the time that the framework was kind of announced and the time the text came out. But as everyone's aware, the Supreme Court really brought up so many other issues. We had the Roe decision, we had Miranda rights, EPA decisions coming down. There's this extremist Supreme Court is really deciding that they're going to be their own kind of legislative politics policies. And so I will say that there were some concerns during the framework for people on the gun violence prevention movement, that there was too much of a focus on mental health in schools and not enough to directly look at what's really driving the gun violence, which is easy access to firearms, that people shouldn't have them. But we're really pleased with a lot of the language that Senator Murphy and his colleagues were able to put in there. Things like $750 million to implement extreme risk protection orders, $250 million for community violence intervention to really try to prevent gun violence in certain communities, as well as closing some loopholes like the so-called boyfriend loophole that you mentioned. That's partially closed, but there's still some work to be done there, as well as these gun dealers that are saying they're not gun dealers. They're just doing, they're just selling at gun shows, but they're selling so many guns that are then we're finding in the illicit black market and on the streets. And so, I think there's a lot of excitement that we're really enforcing some laws that are on the books and providing some real funding to help support implementation. But it's a mixed bag because we were really hoping for new gun laws that really addressed the real crisis of gun violence in this country. And we're hoping for something similar to the House bill that took a more aggressive stance on expanding background checks and looking at child access prevention and assault weapon ban. But I think it's really worth noting that, as you said, it's the first time in over 30 years we're able to get something passed. And I really think it shows that we're in a different place right now. And with the ATF director expected to be confirmed in a couple of weeks, things are feeling very different. And we're feeling hopeful that this may not save tens of thousands of lives every year, but it will save a few thousand lives a year. And I think success will breed progress.
What do you think, Dr. Philandra? Nick said there is excitement about it. I guess I'm going to say people on the ground, and I consider myself one of those people. I don't feel that excitement. I don't feel like people are responding in a way that maybe is appropriate given how significant it is to get anything passed through our House and Senate that's bipartisan, because we know, people right now, our country is terribly divided. And there's not much bipartisan legislation that's getting passed. Do you think this piece of gun legislation has had the splash and impact that those who worked so hard to get it done would have liked?
It's in this very divided environment where it is so difficult to put together any compromise legislation. This is important, but at the same time, it is very limited, and it comes at the heels of the Bruin decision. When we now have a regime where guns are allowed in public places, people can take guns on their body to go outside. And at the same time, the Supreme Court has set up a very high bar for gun control, where Clarence Thomas basically said that the key criterion is going to be his version of history and tradition. It will be very, very difficult to move forward in a progressive way with gun legislation. Even with this law, which is a step forward and it is important, anything we do right now is important, but there is no guarantee that all the states are going to implement this, that they're going to take up, even with the funding and the incentives. We have seen many cases time and again, like Medicaid expansion. Free money. States didn't take it up for ideological reasons. In this case, too, we may have states for ideological reasons and political reasons that they're not going to take it up. So a lot is to be seen in terms of how this gets implemented at the state level, and whether local law enforcement are going to support this. Sheriffs, who have been traditionally very negative towards gun control and ardently supporting gun rights. So it's great to see this at the national level. It's a great symbol and has potential to help, but the proof is in the pudding. We'll see what happens.
Excellent point, Dr. Philandra, about states and their ideological bent, and how many states, as you said, with Medicaid, that's a perfect example. A lot of southern states, even when monies were available to expand Medicaid, didn't do that. And we've seen other federal dollars be allocated to states for various social programs and be rejected. We even saw that during the pandemic with unemployment benefits. Some states refused to expand their unemployment benefits, believing that it would somehow disincentivize people from working. And we know a lot of that's tied into race, and we're not going to get too deep into the race issue, but you really can't talk about any of these issues without talking about race. So Nick, what about what the professor said, that yes, it's good, but a lot of what happens in this bill requires the states on an individual basis to want to adopt the measures and want to draw down these federal funds. And if they choose not to, then the status quo remains in their states.
I think she's absolutely right. And we've seen a lot of states move in the opposite direction on things like permitless carry, which plays into the Supreme Court decision. There's certain things that CAP is really going to be focused on getting the bill passed is important, but implementation is even more important. And so, for example, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, I said there's $750 million in funding, but if states don't want to do that, even though we know that is one of the most effective policies we can do, they can spend that money instead of mental health courts or drug courts or veteran courts. And that might actually make things difficult if we're criminalizing mental health and putting more people in jail, and especially the racial disparities that we see in our criminal justice system. So we're going to be working closely with our partners at the state and local level to show them the research that shows you should invest the money in these proven ways. We were very happy to see that some of the money for school safety went through the Stop School Violence Act, which prohibits this money from being used for school resource officers or target hardening. But there are still some opportunities in this bill for local jurisdictions to go in the opposite direction and do more surveillance or do more threat assessments. And maybe we're very concerned about criminalizing disability and mental health. We're very concerned about the racial disparities anytime we use the criminal justice system. And so there's a lot of work that we're going to have to do, and we're going to ask your listeners and partners on the ground to really help us provide this guidance on how best to implement this. Because if we don't implement it correctly and we don't see a decrease in violence, we're going to have a much harder time passing the laws that we need to pass.
And Professor Philandra, the last couple of mass shootings that we've experienced in this country, the ones that have gotten a lot of national attention, have involved individuals under the age of 21 years old. And we know that the new bill fell short in terms of passing a ban that would have prohibited anyone under the age of 21 from buying a semi-automatic weapon. So if you are under 21 in different states throughout this country, you can still purchase a semi-automatic weapon. Help us understand why that is such a sticking point for Republicans and why that had to be compromised out of the bill in order to pass.
Because given that the age of majority in the United States is 18, they considered it an unfair discrimination against young people. The reason that this provision was popular is because we have a lot of evidence to know that young people, young men, tend to be more violent. That's where you will find, not that all young men are violent, but when there are instances of violence, they are more prevalent among young males. And that's where radicalization can happen. That's where gangs can recruit. As you get older, it's less likely that you will get involved with any form of violence. So to exclude these young men, especially young people, from assault rifles would have been significant. And it's not just a assault rifle. You can go and buy a collection of them and go out in public.
You said that the age of majority in this country is 18, but you can't buy liquor in this country until you're 21. So there are some differences that we make in the country between 18-year-olds and 21-year-olds.
not when it comes to voting and citizenship rights. And because gun ownership by the Heller decision was elevated to an individual right of citizenship, conservatives on the court and in legal circles have been pushing to treat it in the same way as the right to vote and the right to free speech. So it would be an unfair exclusion in this logic to exclude young people 18 to 21 when there is an actual constitutional amendment that allows them to vote. So I think that that's where that concern is coming from. But from a public health perspective, this is essential and reasonable.
Right. And Nick, we know that the federal assault weapons ban of 1994 lapsed in 2004. Is there any expectation that we will be able to get back to a point where there is a national federal assault weapons ban similar to what we had in 2004?
I am hopeful. I don't expect it to happen overnight, but I do believe that the research shows that it was very effective, especially mass shootings, and are very difficult to prevent in a lot of ways. But one thing we can do is reduce the likelihood of mass casualties. And so high capacity magazines and assault weapons are really one of the only ways to do that. And, I spent a while living in Maine, and I would talk to hunters, people that were very big in the gun rights movement, but they didn't understand why people needed assault weapons, and they were more comfortable when they were regulated and banned. And so I think there is some generational differences. And I think there's more and more congressmen and senators are slowly signing up and being more bold about an assault weapons ban. Again, the Supreme Court decision, puts everything a bit into confusion. I mean, and even requiring the age to be 21 to buy certain weapons. California, an appeals court struck that down recently. And so it's very, we're going to keep pushing for these. We think they're constitutional, but this activist court has really changed the entire way that they're going to evaluate whether or not it's something that violates the Second Amendment. It used to be, just as early as Heller, was very much this intermediate scrutiny where you have to be able to balance historical precedent with the interest of public safety and saving lives. And now that they've been able to add these new MAGA Supreme Court justices, 9 years ago, they refused to take up a challenge to New York's law. But now with the new judges, they're much more ambitious in trying to strike down laws. And so we're going to see a lot more litigation at lower courts, and eventually it'll go back to the Supreme Court. And so there's a lot of, I think that's where some of the excitement has the wind was taken out of our sails a bit, because this is kind of an existential threat to a lot of common sense gun regulations. And we're going to continue to fight it in the courts, and we're going to continue to pass for better laws. It's very concerning. I do believe, I get a question a lot, will this Supreme Court case, does it invalidate the law that just passed? I think these are modest measures that got bipartisan support. I don't think there's anything in here that will be struck down. But again, we don't know for sure, because this court has really decided that they're going to make decisions based on their own philosophy.
That's a good point, Nick. I query, Professor Philandro, what in this bill, it seems so mild and it's so compromised, what in it would be offensive and might be challenged from your opinion?
I expect that it will be challenged. I don't know whether it will be upheld or not, but there is every incentive for anything that the gun rights movement doesn't agree with to be challenged. And moving forward, it's going to be really, really difficult to support local ordinances, for example, that prohibit guns in public places. I don't even know if we still don't know what a sensitive place is, because that wasn't defined in the Bruin decision. But we don't know what criteria are now going to be used to define sensitive places, given the new criterion of only historical analysis used as the main focus for what's appropriate as gun regulation.
And that does raise the question, Nick, of this new, the Supreme Court decision striking down that New York law. Does it basically mean that throughout the country, any jurisdiction can enact laws that make it appropriate or legal to carry a gun in a public place without reason? Is that where we're going?
I do believe that, we're working with there's 5 states in addition to New York that their laws might be invalidated based off of this decision. So we're working with them to be able to remove some of so the proper cause requirement was struck down, saying that, if right now in New York, if you can only get a concealed carry permit, maybe if you've been victimized multiple times or you carry a lot of cash for your business. So that will clearly have to be removed. And then there might be some push to remove some law enforcement discretion, which is unfortunate in some ways because law enforcement, they're responsible for keeping their community safe in many ways. And they know if someone is being irresponsible and if they've been, maybe the police have been to their house 10 times for domestic violence calls, but there hasn't been a sustained conviction, or maybe, you're prohibited if you've gotten 3 DUIs in 5 years. What happens if you've had 3 DUIs in 6 years? We might have to lose some of that discretion and be much more explicit in what the requirements are. So Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Hawaii, DC, all these places that actually have some of the lowest rates of gun violence, they're working already quickly to rewrite the laws. But again, we expect to see challenges to those laws, and we will have to continue that fight.
So when you think about, Professor Philandra, the Gruen decision, which is basically kind of inviting, I think, states to have, laws that are even less restrictive to make it easier for people to carry a gun in public for whatever reason, not having any special reason, how are we going to see any decrease in gun violence based on this new bill that we're supposed to be celebrating, because it's the first time in 30 years we've had bipartisan legislation? But we also now have this environment where more people without reason, without training in many instances, can be on the streets in cities across this country with a gun. So they seem to just balance each other out.
We will see declines maybe in certain types of gun violence, like, for example, domestic violence cases. But basically, we will shift the source of violence. And we will see, unfortunately, more Kenosias. We will see more Kyle Rittenhouses. We will see more political violence, which is something that the prohibition of concealed weapons in public places was meant to do in the 19th century. This is why, because people showed up and killed each other for political reasons, for gangs reasons. So in the 19th century, these problems were addressed with bans on concealable weapons. And now we are going to go back to a situation where people will get into political fights and disagreements in public spaces and claim that they felt uncomfortable and unsafe and kill each other. And that is going to be a serious problem. You can't have a democracy where people are able to exchange views that you feel coerced or intimidated at the barrel of a gun. Yeah. We need guns. Cannot coexist with political democracy.
Yeah, Nick. So the professor says we're just shifting the type of gun violence that we will see. That maybe this bill, this celebrated bill, first time in 30 years, bipartisan legislation, might decrease some of those mass shootings that we have been, grieving in this country. The school in Uvalde, the grocery store in Buffalo. But do you expect to see more one-on-one, one-on-two street violence because of the Gruen decision?
I do. We've heard from a lot of law enforcement partners lately that they expect disputes that before were maybe settled in a fist fight. They will now be settled with a shootout, and there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As where I live in Baltimore, people have a perception that everyone is carrying guns, and we see surveys that say maybe they're not. But as that perception, it actually becomes a reality, because then someone, if everybody else is carrying a gun, I should carry a gun. We saw some terrible incidents like in Philadelphia recently, where there was a kind of just interpersonal dispute, and then they pulled out their guns, and then there were people with guns across the street. They had no idea what was going on, but they started shooting and they started hitting bystanders. We start seeing these real shootouts. I will say that we have to know that, unfortunately, I think 24 states already have permitless carry, where you don't even need a permit. So we're already seeing that type of violence grow and grow. And I think that's part of the national conversation in both cities and rural areas about increased gun violence. But for the states that I mentioned that have this law, we will expect to see that they're already relatively safe, and it's going to be less safe. But I will say that there's a lot of things in this bill, in addition to the domestic violence that the professor mentioned, but also, making a federal law against gun trafficking and straw purchasing, going to give the ATF and other law enforcement the opportunity to really stop the flow of easy access of guns to people that are already legally prohibited from having guns, which is common in a lot of cities. And I'll just also add that law enforcement has been very explicit, supporting this bill and concerned about the Bruin decision, because it's very difficult for them to respond. They see someone in Dallas with an assault rifle and everyone else is carrying an assault rifle. They don't know which one is the one who's there to shoot law enforcement or shoot other people, and they have to wait until the violence already starts. They can't go in and go up to that person and ask them why they're carrying a gun, whether it's concealed or open. And so it's going to put law enforcement's life on the line and make it a lot more difficult for them to do their jobs.
Well, if that's the case, Professor Philandro, why is law enforcement, as you stated earlier, not always, but I guess has historically been in opposition to gun safety measures? We saw that in the Uvalde, where you had all those officers, many of them afraid to, go into the school because the shooter was shooting. We now know, the debacle in terms of law enforcement waiting too long. Kids were being murdered as they were outside fumbling or doing whatever they did that was now, deemed incompetent on their parts. So you would think, given the risk that they are at, you'd see more law enforcement stepping up to support gun safety laws.
Historically, actually, city law enforcement has been in support of gun control. It's a relatively recent phenomenon that city law enforcement has become less supportive of gun control. And in part, that has a lot to do with frustration on how to enforce gun laws, certain kinds of gun laws under the current legal regime, and very strong presumption of gun ownership as a right. It's been mostly the elected sheriffs who, because of elected considerations, have supported gun rights more extensively. But also we need to think about the role of the NRA within police departments. The people who train on guns, on gun usage, most of them are NRA trainers. They have been credentialed, and this is historical. It goes back to the 1930s. They have learned how to do this, and they have been certified by the NRA, which means that they also have learned to promote the ideology that goes along with the NRA.
And these NRA trainers are training our local law enforcement throughout the country?
In many cases, yes, they are. And they have been for a century. Obviously, people are learning, they're going to police academies and learning how to shoot there, but a lot of the credentialing and the training and the design of courses has come out of NRA processes.
And you mean those elected sheriffs, you mean elected sheriffs who rely on funding for their campaigns from NRA and other gun rights groups and political groups that fund these campaigns for local sheriffs who are elected, as you said.
right? And voters in areas that are conservative and want to have a sheriff who is conservative as well. And when it comes to training, the other problem, which is huge, and I don't know how we'll be able to address, is the training of civilians who you go and buy a firearm, and the training that you receive is minimal. And actually, the New York Times had a report a few days ago where they showed data from within industry, the guns industry, where they showed that more than 50% of gun owners in surveys that the industry did said that they have minimal knowledge of how to use their weapons. People go and buy assault rifles and have zero idea what to do with them, how to keep them, where to store them, how to load them. And then are we surprised that a child finds them and kills themselves or kills somebody else?
Yeah, that's the issue now in this Ethan Crumbley case, the 15-year-old that killed 4 students in that Oxford school in Michigan. The big fight is over whether that gun was secured or not. Of course, he got access to the gun. His parents, who've been charged with involuntary manslaughter, are claiming that the gun was in a secure location. But you're saying 50% of gun owners have no clue about gun safety or gun ownership or even usage. All right, Nick, we're out of time on this segment. Please tell me something positive, because I've gotten more and more depressed listening to this conversation. I went from maybe I need to own a gun to, oh no, I would be in that 50% that wouldn't know how to use a gun, to, okay, there's got to be a bright light somewhere in this whole gun debate, because it seems like we're going backwards rather than forward.
Yeah, I think it's really a mixed bag. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it, but I do think that this bill, with so many Republicans putting their name on a gun bill, as well as overwhelming support for the ATF confirmation, I really think this shows that we're in a different moment. I think success will breed success. Republicans will see at the ballot box that the gun lobby doesn't have the political power they've projected, and that we'll be able to come back to Congress as well as at the state level and continue to push for new measures and new laws that will be even more important to saving lives. And so this is just the first step. It's not the end of the conversation, and we're not going to let the Supreme Court stop us from passing the laws that we know will save lives.
Great way to end this segment. Thank you so much, Nick, for your work. Thank you, Professor Philandro. When you finish that book, I'm so interested in your title, the book's title, as well as the concepts that I'm sure you're going to cover in it. So I know it comes out next year, but we'd love to have you back to talk about it. Again, that's Race, Rights, and Rifles, which will be out next year by Professor Philandro. Again, thanks both of you for joining me this morning. It's a very interesting conversation. And thank you, Nick, for giving me some hope. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Nick mentioned the ballot box. So here to talk about how this gun law, or this 30-year in the making gun law, what impact, if any, is it going to have at the ballot box? Joining me is Richard Green. He's a political communication strategist and author of Words That Shook the World. He's been on multiple times helping us understand how these things that happen in D.C. translate down to the local level and into the ballot box and choices people make when they vote. Good morning, Richard, and good to see you since Friday, since we had our chance encounter on the streets of Beverly Hills on Friday. How are you, my friend?
Here we go. And you were looking spectacularly beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
It's so weird to see someone in 3D after seeing them so often in 2D. So here's the bottom line. I think we are barreling towards the necessity to elect enough additional members of the United States Senate that we can reliably create carve-outs to this horrible, horrible, horrible anti-democratic thing called the filibuster, and do the following. One is, of course, pass very strong background checks. Number two, equally important, is to renew the assault weapons ban, which most people don't remember. Dianne Feinstein sponsored that. It passed in 1994. It lasted for 10 years because that's all they could get. And so and killings with assault weapons diminished during that time. Surprise, surprise. I mean, I think the fundamental thing, I'm in Aspen right now. They let it lapse because there was a question. They let it lapse because they couldn't renew it, right? They could only get 10 years. And then because of the strength of the NRA and the crazy Republicans, they could not get it passed, right? So we have to, so I'm in Aspen Ideas Festival on my way to Europe. And I've been speaking to my clients in Europe, and between abortion and guns, they're saying, what happened to the United States of America? You guys have gone crazy. And the fact that an 18-year-old cannot even go into a bar or a supermarket and buy a beer, but they can walk into a Walmart and walk out with a machine gun, right? And let's call it what it is. It's a military style machine gun. Makes no sense. So we're going to have to think radically. We're going to need to expand the Supreme Court or do some radical reform of the Supreme Court to change these gun laws. We're going to have to add Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states so we can fix the undemocratic United States Senate. And we're going to have to pass the Women's Health Protection Act on another subject so we could restore reproductive rights. All these things are possible. This is the thing, I know you keep coming to me. All these things are possible if people vote.
No, and no doubt about it, Richard, these things are very possible, and I agree with you. I want to talk about, though, how these messages and what happens at the Supreme Court gets translated down to everyday voters, because people like you and me and others who, sometimes maybe less than 1 million people who are watching cable news, many are, watching news on their phones and on social media sites, but the majority of the world is not, in the world, I mean U.S. voters, is not tuned in a hypersensitive way to these issues that are happening. Many people don't even know that the Supreme Court at this very moment is eviscerating pretty much, all the rights that we hold dear in this country. And how are we going to get that message to folks on the ground? Because everywhere you go, and if you even look on social media, the memes, the conversation is around gas prices. People, go to the pumps and they're posting their pictures of how much they had to pay for gas, and there are jokes about gas prices. So that seems to be on the minds of everyday people. Gas, not the Gruen decision by the Supreme Court, not the Dobbs decision, although we saw protesters out over the weekend on Dobbs. But do you think this message is resonating with everyday voters who are at the pump worried about their money paid for gas?
So first of all, even with all the messaging about inflation and gas prices, there's still going to be about 120 million Americans who are not moved by that messaging enough to vote. That's who we need to focus on. And so I actually met with Frank Luntz, the Republican messaging guru here in Aspen, and we were talking about it, and he liked this idea. So from this point on, Areva, I'd like your cooperation in saying it is no longer the 2022 midterms. Okay. It is the women's reproductive choice elections of 2022. Okay. It is the end mass killings elections of 2022. It is the climate emergency elections of 2022. As a civics educator, I am telling you the reason people don't care about the midterms is they don't know what it is. They think it's inconsequential and that the only thing that matters are the presidential elections, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And so if you have Snoop Dogg saying, are you registered to vote in the marijuana midterms? Because marijuana is on the ballot in terms of federal decriminalization, already passed the House of Representatives, just needs a few more Democratic senators. Or if you have Leo DiCaprio or Billie Eilish saying, are you registered to vote in the climate emergency elections or the women's reproductive choice elections, I think we can break through on the messaging. And we've got to start doing that now.
That's a great point. you're saying we've got to frame the elections in the words that people will understand and that will resonate with people, because midterm is too generic. Nobody knows what it is. They don't think anything big is happening in November. So we've got to remind them of that it is. So we saw, Richard, in Georgia leading up to 2020, this massive organizing with Black Votes Matter and the Stacey Abrams group and different voter organization groups, which led to the election of those two Democratic senators. We know, as you just said, about 120 million people who don't vote. Are those people? They're not registered either, are they? These people, these kind of.
A lot of them are registered.
A lot of them are registered. Okay, so.
The numbers are, and so Linda Lake just shared this with me, the estimation right now is that 25% of 18 to 34-year-olds will vote in this election. So a lot of the other 75% who are staying home, they are registered, or they can easily register.
We don't have a registration problem in this country.
I don't think that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is lack of understanding of how important it is on all of these issues that those 120 million people care about, it is to vote. And let me just address gas prices. So I have an electric car. I pay about $1.29 a gallon in California. If you're in Texas, you're going to pay about 80 cents a gallon because electricity is so much cheaper. Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress have wanted to incentivize the purchase of electric cars and the expansion of the electric car infrastructure. That will cause people to save so much money on top of so many of other things that are being done to bring down the cost. $35 insulin, free childcare for people who need it, pre-K education. So we have a messaging problem, and we do not stand up for what it is that we're going to do, that we actually have plans for. And I asked one of your guests on the last time, I said, what's the Republican plan? You can complain about gas prices and inflation, but what's the Republican plan? They don't have a plan. They don't
govern by plans. They just govern by critique. So we know that Mitch McConnell, in fact, he got mad. Was it Rick Scott or one of those?
Rick Scott, yeah.
Laid out a plan because Mitch is like, look, dude, we're not the planned party. We don't have policies. We don't go around, disseminating plans. We are the critique and tear down the Democrats and obstruct party. And he was very upset about that. Let me ask you about a plan that Dems do have, Richard, and tell me what you think about it. We have seen in some races, Illinois and Colorado to be specific, where the Democrat incumbent, in this case in Illinois, Governor Pritzker, spent about $4 million. I don't know if it was his money or the party's money, but they were trying to influence who Pritzker would run against in the general election in November. And they poured all this money to really, to shrink the numbers of this moderate Republican mayor from Aurora, to inflate the numbers of this extremist state senator Bailey, who called Chicago a hellhole, who wouldn't wear a mask on the state, legislative floor, and who was a big Trump supporter. Trump actually endorsed him over the weekend, and Bailey won. And Pritzker did that because he wanted to run against Bailey, this extremist. In Colorado, they tried something very similar, but the extremist who was actually in the Capitol on January 6th lost, and the more moderate Republican won. Do you think that's an effective strategy that Dems across the country should be employing, trying to, beef up the numbers of the extremists so they can run in a general election against the extremists?
That is pure old-fashioned politics. Claire McCaskill did it against Todd Aiken in Missouri to win that Senate seat in 2006. And you know who else did that, although it backfired? Hillary Clinton in 2016. Everybody wanted Donald Trump, right? Because they thought he could be easily beaten. I think it's not a bad strategy, honestly. Mm-hmm. But I think it's only a necessary strategy because the Democratic Party sucks at teaching and explaining and messaging who they are and what they are going to do for people's lives, as opposed to any Republican, even the best Republican. Here at the Aspen Ideas Festival, there's Rob Portman, right? Oh, he's such a good Republican from Ohio, the senator. He sucks. He votes against everything that America wants, with a few exceptions. We just have to make the case. There's one party that stands for you. That's the Democratic Party. And there's another party that historically stands for racists and big corporations and gun owners and Christian evangelicals. Pick your lane.
So, Richard, after the Dobbs decision overturning Roe, there were lots of folks on social media, a lot of them so-called progressives, saying, look, idiot Democrats, you have supported Democrats for years. They had 50 years to codify Roe, make it a national federal law. They didn't do it. You're not getting anything from these Dems, jump ship. And a lot of folks were repeating and, retweeting and reposting these kinds of comments like, again, Dems, you got, you got the wool pulled over your eye again. You voted Democratic and look what you got. Your rights taken away from you, even to control your own reproductive health. How do we combat those messages? And that resonates with a lot of people who start to feel really, apathetic, and they get very cynical about the process.
So David Plouffe addressed this, like, why during the Obama administration didn't we codify Roe? And he said that there weren't the votes. There were a lot of pro-life Democrats at the time. Here's the bottom line. Here's the answer to everybody. We didn't have historically, we don't have now enough progressive Democrats to accomplish what you want. But guess what? There's a frickin' remedy for that. Get every Black person, every brown person, every woman, every young person out to vote for the AOCs or the Bernie Sanders or the whoever it is that you like, and it will change. There's a magic number in America. I've talked about this before. 270. You need 218 in the House. You need 51 who are willing to change the filibuster in the Senate, and you need the right person in the White House to sign these bills. If you have 269, you get nothing. If you have 270, you get everything. And that's what these midterms are about. And there are things that we've been able to get. I mean, look at Ketanji Brown Jackson. That would not have happened unless people got out to vote in Georgia and across the country.
You raise a good point. You just said we can get things that we want if we elect more progressive. So one of the things that happened over the weekend, AOC went ballistic on Biden. The Biden-Harris administration said that Biden was pretty much a pro-life Dem up until 2019, and said that the response from the top, that Biden and Harris, was too timid. And they repeated, Dems got very mad at Kamala when she did the interview with Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, out of respect, when she did the interview with Donna Bash from CNN and said that people should vote. People went crazy. Like, why does Biden and Harris keep talking about voting when we should be doing so much more? So are you inviting an inter-war when you say that, Richard? Because the progressives are already shooting knives and they got guns pointed at what they're calling the institutionalists, i.e. Biden and Harris. Do we need another inter-party fight right now? The enemy are the Republicans.
Again, it comes down to understanding how to get things done in the government. Joe Biden cannot just reverse Roe v. Wade, the reverse rule of Roe v. Wade. Joe Biden can't change the filibuster. Joe Biden can't do a lot. We have separation of powers. We have three co-equal branches. Don't be yelling at people who don't have the power to do things. Give them the ability to do it, which means electing people at the state, local, and federal level. I know it sounds frickin' boring and old-fashioned, and that I'm mansplaining, you middle-aged white guy, you keep telling us to vote. I'm sorry, that's the frickin' answer to most things. Now, do we also want people like Joe Biden to stand up against the filibuster and be in favor of adding people to the court and be more aggressive? Yes, we do. But he's a hell of a lot better than 4 more years of Donald Trump. So please just be grateful.
Is there anything,
Sorry.
those progressives will kill you to say Clyburn said the decision in Dobbs was anticlimactic and the progressives lost their mind. So if you say, just be grateful, they'll go crazy. Like, that's what the Democrats always say, just take the crumbs and we want more than the crumbs. And I know what you mean when you say that. So
No, but it's the difference
I'm not going to
between,
go ballistic because I know what you mean. But let me ask you this.
it's the difference between crumbs and fascism. You pick your poison, okay?
I'm all for the mature, disciplined approach to electoral politics. What about Biden? Is there anything he can do from an executive order? Because, again, people who miss fifth grade civic think that Biden can maybe expand the court, help disabuse those folks of this notion that there is all this power in executive orders.
Joe Biden has one vote to expand the court, and that is to sign the Judiciary Act of 2021 or whatever it is that will expand the court. That's what he can do, but he cannot do anything until Congress gives him a bill. The same thing for the Women's Health Protection Act to restore abortion rights. He can't do it. We have three co-equal branches of government. I'm sorry.
He says he can make abortion legal on federal properties.
That is likely to be the case.
And you think he'll move in that direction? He hasn't. I don't know if I haven't read anything. Did he say he was opposed to that? Do you know?
Actually, I don't know. When I heard it, it was like, wow, that's a really interesting thing because the federal jurisdiction is like a state jurisdiction over their own state rules. Yeah, I think he should probably do that. Let me research it and see if there's a reason why he's not.
Okay. Let's talk about, I know we have to focus on more than the presidential election, but there's a lot of conversations happening right now online about the presidential election. And in fact, Biden, in a New York Times article, says he's sick of people asking him if he's running again. Some of this is his own fault, because remember when he ran, he said he was going to be a bridge to the next generation. So people now are kind of clamoring like, your poll numbers are low. Maybe this is the time for you to step aside. But some of these same people are making it very clear they do not want Vice President Harris to be the presumptive nominee, and they want to open up this field to other candidates. And that brings me to our governor, state of California, who has, Gavin Newsom, been on the warpath, criticizing the DNC, Jamie Harrison, Cedric Richmond, but saying he's not really criticizing Biden and Harris, which is a little disingenuous because, the DNC is inextricably tied to the top of the party. Is Gavin running for president?
Of course he is. I mean, not actively. And I've spoken to him about it and I've encouraged him to do certain things over the years. I think Gavin is in the top 5 of people who should be thinking seriously a bit about running in a primary. By the way, I do not think all I want to do is beat Ron DeSantis. I don't care who it is. I would like to see you run, Areva. I actually think you'd be pretty awesome. But I think Joe Biden cannot win in 2024, especially against Ron DeSantis.
Okay, wait a minute.
Kamala Harris can't win either.
Wait, slow down. This is some blockbusting news right here, Richard. You do not think Joe Biden can win the 2024 presidential election?
I do not.
Against any Republican?
The only person he could potentially win against would be Donald Trump, who really got weakened yesterday because of that incredibly brave woman. But I don't think Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. I think it's going to be Ron DeSantis. Okay. And my favorites are Gavin Newsom, Stacey Abrams, especially if she wins the governorship in Georgia, and Katie Porter, who I just adore. I think she is the model.
Slow your roll. Just slow down. How is Katie Porter? Let's take her, for example. First of all, let's deal with the logistics here. If Joe Biden is not running for re-election, whoever is running needs to be running now if they don't have national name recognition. And you got to raise almost $1 billion. how is Katie Porter going to do that? And where is she going to get the support, particularly from Black women who are the base of the Democratic Party? Clyburn, who's already said if Biden doesn't run, he's with Harris. So how is Katie Porter going to get past Kamala Harris?
Listen, it's going to be messy. It's going to be a total S show. It will. And
Well, that doesn't look like we're going to win if it's going to be a shit show for the Democrats.
Well, I think it's going to be a real shit show for the Republicans as well. 2024 is going to be a total mess on both sides, because how does Ron DeSantis dethrone Donald Trump, right, without losing support, right? I mean, it's going to be really tricky for him. Listen, Katie Porter, I'm just saying that's the kind of new politician that I want to see. You know, fierce, brilliant law professor. You know, she doesn't care about anything. She's fearless. I love that.
Richard, you know the Democratic Party is a wait your turn hierarchical party. That's why we have our party leadership is in their 80s, not because they're not young, bright leaders in our party, but because Hakeem Jeffries can't leapfrog over Hoyer and Clyburn to be the speaker. Hakeem, 50-year-old brilliant lawyer,
Brilliant,
kick-ass congressman. But in this big tent party, you've got to wait your turn. So how is Katie Porter going to leapfrog over Kamala Harris? And let's throw in Pete Buttigieg and all these other folks. Elizabeth Warren, who said she would probably run again. Amy Klobuchar said she would probably run again. Come on, Richard.
Areva, you're not being fair here. I did not say she was likely to win. I'm simply saying we do have a good bench. We've got some really, and Hakeem Jeffries, man, I'd love to see him be president. He's incredibly impressive.
Okay, Richard.
The point is, listen, Joe Biden was dead until James Clyburn resurrected him with the help of Black voters, right? Anything can happen in a millisecond. So you can never count anyone out, even Katie Porter. Go ahead.
You don't like Joe Biden. You think he's weak. I know that.
I love Joe Biden.
No, you got some deep-rooted stuff going on with Joe Biden. That's okay.
I think not. I just think he can't win. That's all I care about.
Okay. How do we win an election against a DeSantis who has built himself up as a national Republican if we don't have a Democrat that is going to be able to garner the majority of the support? I don't see a Gavin Newsom. How's Gavin Newsom going to win in the Midwest? Why aren't the Midwesterners going to see him as a bubble elitist, California elitist? They say we think of the Midwest as these flyover states. How does Gavin Newsom get over that? He was the first guy out on gay marriage, on marriage equality. That's great for us in California. In New York, we love it. Midwesterners, not so much.
Listen, the Democratic Party and Gavin Newsom stand for what the vast majority of Americans want, especially young people. Gavin Newsom actually is an incredibly impressive guy. And the more people get to know him beyond his mistake of eating at the French Laundry, the more they're going to love him. But the bottom line is we need to, in the next 2 years, Areva, we need to elect enough people in this election so we can actually show the American people who we are and what kind of policies we are going to create to help people who are suffering across America. If we can do that, any one of our candidates can beat Ron DeSantis. If we don't do that, we're done.
Let me ask you this. Is Gavin Newsom going to endorse Karen Bass for the mayor of Los Angeles?
I'm going to have some bad news for you. I don't think Karen's going to win. I've told you that. If Gavin endorses her, I think that would help, but okay. I don't know.
You are categorically wrong. You know why? Because all those young people and progressives that you talked about voting, first of all, she's already 7 points ahead of Rick Caruso. And in that November reproductive women's rights election that's coming up, in that, take back the Supreme Court election, all of those young people are going to be out voting. And it's no way they're going to be voting for a guy that says he wants to take the Democratic Party back 30 years, because those people are going to be voting out those elected officials that want to take the party backwards. So,
well, but Rick Caruso has a lot of celebrity endorsements, which is shocking to me.
Paltrow.
No, there are others.
That is the reason he won't win, because of that, because of those white women who told us they were allies, but yet they're standing with a man that wants to further militarize Los Angeles Police Department and throw us back 30 years. And 30 years wasn't so great for people of color. So that is the reason that people have come out in droves to vote against him. So those celebrities, not so much, Richard.
We'll see. Let's make a deal. You help me get all those young voters who will otherwise not vote to turn out and vote in Los Angeles. And then Karen will win. Karen has my vote for no other reason. I mean, I think she's going to be great, but I cannot vote for a man who donated to Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy's campaign and remained a Republican while the orange antichrist was the head of that party.
And that's so important. And we're going to end on this. I'm so glad you said that. That is how Republicans win elections, right? They are single issue voters, and they are loyal to their party in ways. Democrats, we expect everything. And Karen and Rick Caruso, if for no other reason, if you are a Democrat, you should not be voting for a guy that just did everything you said, just because. You may not like Karen, you may not like any of her policies, but Republicans win because they hated everything about Donald Trump except that R. And they went in there and they voted for him because he was a Republican. And Democrats who are betraying the party, and those celebrities that you just identified who claim to be Dems are doing that, are elevating a man who has for most of his life been a Republican and who has sided with Republicans. Yes, he's donated to some Dem candidates too, and he's done some, philanthropy in the city. But at his core, he has been more supportive of Republicans than Democrats. And if Democrats started to do exactly what you said, hung together, lady on my show yesterday, Joy Cahill, said, get your people. So if you get your people, Richard, and that's those white women allies, you get them, I'm going to get these young people, and then we're not going to have a problem in these women's reproductive rights elections coming up in November. Do we have a deal? You're going to get your people?
We have a deal.
Okay, I'm going to get my people. Good to see you, Richard. Have fun.
To see you in person soon.
Okay.
Take care. Thanks.
All right. Great show. Thanks to all my guests today. I love always talking to Richard because he and I agree on so much, and things we don't agree, we always agree to disagree. But this is such an important and critical time in our history. And even if you're not following the Supreme Court closely, we're going to help you, because next week we're going to do a show on the Supreme Court, and every one of these decisions that we kind of touched upon today in reference, we're going to go in deeper detail so that you'll have a clear understanding about why these decisions have a profound impact on your lives, on your daily lives. And even if you're not hyper-focused on what's happening in the Democratic or Republican Party, we want you to be so knowledgeable that when you go and vote in these women reproductive rights elections that are coming up in November, you have all the information you need to make good choices. Just some quick words to live by before I get out. Don't let the pursuit for the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that is so important in this era. Yes, Democratic candidates are not perfect, but as Richard has explained, boy, they are the only game in town at this moment. They are the only party that's fighting for the rights of everyday people, people like you, people like me, people like our kids, our parents, our grandparents. And if we want to see this country get back on track, we've got to vote for Democrats in these critical upcoming elections. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.